inking about money at this point. He is a former Uber driver. I've dealt with a whole bunch of unpleasant characters, from the drunken groups of friends on Saturday nights to the people who pretend to be handicapped to get free rides. But every so often, you may pick up somebody who can just be classified as a straight-up creep. I've picked up a few of these guys, but never one quite as bad as a guy named Ben. It was a Friday night in December, one of the coldest nights of the year. I had nothing to do, so I figured I'd do some late-night pickups. This was 2 years ago. I was 18 and had a new Honda Accord. My parents kind of spoiled me a bit. I was a very skinny 18-year-old, though, and that's why my dad told me to always keep a blade in my car, because you never know what kind of nuts are getting into the car. A guy named Ben popped up a couple of miles away by a major shopping area. I responded to his request and started driving in that direction. I pulled up in front of the shopping center where I saw a group of teenagers hanging out. It looked like trouble. I hoped this Ben guy wasn't part of this group. A bunch of them looked at me and my car as I slowly passed. Eventually, I just hit the gas and went further into the parking lot of the shopping center, wanting to get away from this group. I did 2 laps around the whole parking lot until I finally noticed through my left mirror somebody approaching my car from behind. I rolled down my window and called out, "Ben." He called back, "Yes." I told him to hop in. I had to repeat myself 3 times, and given that all I was saying was "hop in," very clearly made the situation very weird from the start. The 4th time he finally understood me and walked slowly around the back, getting into the seat right behind me. Usually, the people I picked up would sit diagonally from me, which is what I preferred. When people sat right behind me, it just made me a little paranoid sometimes, especially when the person seemed kind of creepy. This guy was old. He had to be in his upper 40s. When I asked him his age, he told me he was 46, which I entered into my phone. By his voice, I could tell he was a very heavy smoker. Come to think of it, my car was starting to smell like cigarettes. The address he gave me was 10 miles away, which was fine since that meant I'd be making more money. I tried making small talk initially, which didn't work out too well. If I would ask him a yes or no question, sometimes he'd just mumble, and any other questions led to dry responses. I stopped talking when he completely ignored one of my questions. There were still 5 miles to go. By the 6-mile mark, things started getting uneasy. I was afraid to look into the rearview mirror because I was so sure that he was staring at me. I took a quick half-second glance, and I was right. He was, in fact, staring at me. My body forced my foot down heavier on the gas. I wanted this ride to be over sooner. By the 8-mile mark, I started to realize we were in the middle of nowhere. We were on basically a deserted street with woods on either side and occasional buildings. I was growing suspicious now as to where this address he told me actually was, so while driving, I dragged my finger across my phone to slide the map in the direction of the address. It seemed to lead to a dead-end street with no surrounding streets nearby. I was getting more and more nervous with each passing minute. I shot a glance back up again at the mirror, and he was still watching me. I finally summoned up the courage to ask him if the address he gave me was of his house. There was silence for a few moments, and I thought he was once again going to ignore me or possibly didn't hear me. But 5 seconds later, he finally answered, "Yes." There was less than a mile left in the drive now, still surrounded by nothing but woods with the occasional empty-looking building. I was approaching the dead-end street that the address he gave me resided on, hoping some houses would come into sight. As the street came up, I slowed down so I could get a good look at it, but nothing could be seen, just pitch blackness. I could only imagine why he wanted to get me out here alone, so far away from anybody or anything. I casually kept driving, pretending like I missed it, hoping he wouldn't notice. But he did. Instantly, he hopped out of his seat and yelled at me to turn around. Honestly, I felt like my life was on the line, so I apologized and did a quick three-point turn. As I was repositioning, I flicked a blade open and held it tight in my right hand, ready to use it. I turned down the dead-end road, with my headlights now displaying just what I thought I would see, nothing but trees on either side. I made it to the end of the road, not a single house or building. I just knew something was about to go down. I was just trying to physically and mentally prepare myself for it. Suddenly, he said in as soft a voice as he probably could, "Thanks for the ride." I wasn't even opened his door, but before stepping out, he said, "Could you get out of the car for a second? I need help carrying my bag. I have a bad back." But he didn't have a bag. I knew he didn't. He didn't come in with one. I replied, yeah, sure. Let yourself out and I'll help you in a sec." The shakiness in my voice was too obvious. What happened next I never imagined would happen. All of a sudden, I felt pressure on my neck. It took me at least a second before I could realize he was choking me from the back seat. Immediately, I drilled the blade into his left arm, and he screamed in pain, releasing his grip on my neck. He fell out of the car and onto the street, and I took that opportunity to turn the car around and practically floor it down the street until I returned to a busy road. I actually didn't end up calling the cops. I was just too scared to do anything but drive home, and by the time I got home, I just wanted to go to sleep and forget about it. Needless to say, I resigned from my Uber driving days after this incident. I was a 21-year-old male living on the outskirts of the city. I personally enjoyed living in a rural area as I found it more peaceful than living in the city, where it was often congested with hordes of pedestrians roaming the streets. The area where I resided was made up of crop fields and farmland, not the commonly seen infrastructure I was used to seeing in the city. It was nothing but just farm animals and broad landscapes glistening within the horizon. I usually was in the city for the latter part of my day, as I was a full-time Uber driver that worked close to 12 hours a day. I personally didn't like the job a whole lot, but unfortunately, I didn't have much of a choice, as I needed to help my parents pay off their mortgage that was lingering over their shoulders for the last decade or so. I wasn't much of a people person, so I would always drive in silence or casually have the radio playing in the background just to ease the subtle awkwardness of a complete stranger sitting in the passenger seat next to me. I remember on this one particular night, I was heading home from a long shift of driving a bunch of drunk college students around the city, considering it was the weekend. The time was around 2 or 3 in the morning when I was driving through the back ends of the countryside, as it was usually the quickest route to get home. It was generally recommended not to take this direction during these times, as there weren't many street lights around, just tall crop fields and one gloomy road ahead. What the hell was that? I remember getting out of my car and slowly approaching the front bumper just to see what the hell collided with my vehicle. I can recall seeing a deer's body laying lifelessly on the dirt road. It was almost as if the sudden impact from my car had completely obliterated the deer's physical frame into a bloody matter of guts and organs scattered all over the ground. The deer was surprisingly still alive, as I could hear it wheezing in agony while its legs began twitching from the initial shock of the collision. I legitimately felt sick to my stomach and immediately went inside my car. I didn't know if calling 911 would be the wisest decision, considering I was young and naive. I was honestly convinced that there was a possibility that I could go to jail. That's when I ultimately decided to take matters into my own hands. I grabbed a pair of latex gloves from the glove compartment of my car, put them on, and held the deer by its legs while manually dragging the dead carcass off to the side of the road. I began hearing police sirens coming from a distance. That's when the paranoia began settling inside my head, as I thought someone from afar had called the cops on me. I then went inside my vehicle and began to drive off, not caring if my car had further trampled whatever life was remaining within that deer. It's just a deer. It's just a deer. Don't worry. It's just a deer. It's definitely not a hit and run. I just made an honest mistake. How the hell could it be my fault if there's no goddamn street lights? I eventually made it home and pulled into my driveway as I decided to clean the remaining blood residue lingering on the hood of my car. I didn't want to raise any suspicion from any onlooking neighbors. So, I decided to park my car inside my garage so I could hose my car without the feeling of being watched. After several minutes of intense cleaning, I decided to quietly approach my washroom without waking up my parents. I began to fill my bathtub up with warm water, as the idea of soaking for an hour or two wouldn't hurt my chances of calming my nerves down. The next couple of shifts, I was able to get back on the horse as I conducted business as usual. I honestly swept the entire deer occurrence under the rug, as I needed to get on with my life and not latch on to a simple mistake that inevitably would have happened. I decided to take an entirely alternate route and not the dark back roads when heading home. I couldn't run the risk of hitting another deer, as the guilt from the first deer still tears me to shreds internally. I remember this one night I worked the usual graveyard hours when I picked up this one girl near a busy location in the city. She surprisingly lived in the direction of where I resided, so I figured dropping her off was a bargain one couldn't refuse. As we made our way home, I remember looking at my rearview mirror and seeing a rotting deer's head carcass laying on the back seat of my car. That's when I slammed my foot on the gas pedal and began jetting through the freeway. The Uber customer yelled, "What the hell are you doing, sir? Can you please pull over? I want to get out. Stop the car. Stop the car. Stop it. Are you crazy? Are you crazy? Let me out of your car, you freak." That's when I abruptly swerved my car in the direction of the back roads where I had initially killed the deer. I gradually accelerated my vehicle through the field of crops and trees, while simultaneously contemplating if I was hallucinating or if my brain was playing sadistic tricks on me. I then casually drew my attention towards the passenger, and I could visibly see the woman's head turn into a deer's. It's just a deer. It's just a deer. Don't worry. It's just a deer. It's definitely not a hit and run. I just made an honest mistake. I'm a 18-year-old girl living in Baltimore, Maryland. For those who don't know, Baltimore hasn't always been the nicest of places to live, though I've mostly gotten along just fine. And luckily, I no longer live in the city, just right outside of it. You can still expect, though, that I was raised to be hyper-aware of my surroundings and very wary of strangers. At this time, my school would just let me out for spring break and we got the announcement for an extended break. At that time, I didn't drive, and neither my sister nor my parents could pick me up. With all my friends now living near me, I really had no choice but to Uber home. I wasn't new to Ubering to and from school. I've actually always had pretty good experiences with Uber up until this point. Either I get the usual quiet, relaxing kind, or I get some really friendly people with interesting conversations. On the day when my driver picked me up, at first it was perfectly fine. We made some polite conversation and we actually were getting along just fine. Now keep in mind there were only 2 more common routes to take me back to my home. Both routes only took about 15 minutes and all included very few main roads and mostly back roads. I also have a habit of looking at my Uber driver's phone whenever it's in that little phone holder. As soon as this guy started going off the suggested route, I became immediately more alert. I continued to converse with this guy, acting like I didn't notice a thing, still glancing at the GPS on his phone the entire time he was off route. Then he pulled onto the highway. Then I got quiet. It wasn't like the conversation just died down naturally. He just stopped answering me. I immediately became nervous. The guy wasn't taking me anywhere near my home. He was actually going down freeways that would have taken me into a whole different state. I immediately texted my friend group chat with what was happening, showing them the guy's profile and everything, texting them that if I don't respond within an hour to any of them to call the police. I was way too scared to press the safety button on my phone because I knew it wasn't uncommon for Uber drivers to purposely take super long routes to get more money. Still, I gathered up all my courage and I spoke up to him, letting him know that I was suspicious of him. "Excuse me, I'm sorry, but is this the right way? All the times I've Ubered, I've never been taken on the highway before," I said to him. Pretty much immediately, he started to reassure me that I was safe and he was taking a quicker route. Yeah, right. As I mentioned before, a normal trip home would have only taken about 15 minutes, maybe even less. I was in the car for nearly half an hour now. Then I tried to call my dad. He didn't answer. So what I did instead was give an Oscar award-winning fake phone call. "Hey Dad, yeah, I'm on the highway right now. Yeah, my location is shared with you. Why? Okay, yep, I will. I'll talk to you when I get home. Bye, love you too." My Uber driver was staring at me for the duration of that entire fake phone call. I hoped if he thought my dad knew where I was and that he was expecting me to come home, he would hopefully not have any ill intentions with me. Right then, suddenly, my driver turned into a highway exit, and within another 20 minutes, I was on my main road home that I don't think I've ever gotten out of any car so fast in my life. Still, though, my dumbass still gave him a decent rating and a tip. I guess because at the time, I truly didn't know if he had any ill intentions with me. I mean, it's very unlikely that he could have just been another Uber driver trying to make an extra buck. And that he did. I nearly got charged $20 more for what I usually pay for my ride I usually had to pay on that trip. I still wish that I'd emailed some kind of Uber customer service or something and explained the situation. Needless to say, please stay safe out there when Ubering, guys. If your driver ever goes off route for an extended period of time for no apparent reason, make it known that you're aware of it and that you're onto them. It could just very much possibly save your life. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.